Okay, I'm going to call our meeting to order this evening, our work session. Start with recognition of administrative people.
Mayor Jamie Slutes. Safety Service Director Renee Baker. Assistant Law Director Edmund Mack. City Engineer Alex Pitts. Director of Development Ted Hernkane. And Parks and Rec Director Steve Pedro. Is there anyone? Oh, I'm sorry. Lori Katagides-Boron. Here. Income Tax Budget Director. Is there anyone else I missed? That's it, President Pro Tem.
All right, thank you. Let records show we have 8 members of council present, except for Councilman Ray, and also our president, Mike Slater, is present as well. All right, we'll start off with community development.
I have nothing, Mr. Gregg, for community development.
Okay, thank you. Economic development, is somebody taking anything from Mr. Ray? I don't think that we had anything on the schedule. Nope.
Nothing for economic development this evening.
All right, thank you. Health, welfare, and building regulations, Councilwoman Cunningham.
Thank you, Mr. Pro Tem. I have quite a bit this evening, but before I begin with that, Mr. Mayor, would you please stand?
Oh, good Lord.
This is a shout out. I was unable to be here last week as I'm still recovering from surgery, but I wanted to give you a shout out. I was one of the many people that took a Valentine's Day card with a little bit of a gift inside for a young gentleman, Mr. Demando. And I just think it was wonderful. I did also see the piece that they did on, I think, Channel 8 Fox News, which I thought was very good. And it really touched my heart to see how many people did help to give that little boy a very special Valentine's Day, and I wanted to thank you. And thanks for standing. I know, I felt, man, I got some power. Okay, we have 4 pieces of legislation for the International Property Maintenance Code. So at this time, I would like to ask Mr. Mack to please come up to the microphone for questions, and we'll start with our first piece. Yes, please. I know the committee, there's a couple on the committee that still have a few comments and questions. On this first piece, please prepare legislation to amend ordinance number 103-2025 pertaining to Chapter 1306, International Property Maintenance Code under Title I, Building Codes of Part 13, Building Code of the Codified Ordinances of Massillon, Ohio. Amend ordinance number 103-2025 under Section 1306, period 03, amendments, deletions, and supplements to the International Property Maintenance Code, Section 107.4, parentheses IV, shall be amended to read, if any notice or order is not complied with, the violator shall be guilty of a first-degree misdemeanor. See attached Exhibit A. Do you wish to comment on that, please, and then ask for questions?
Sure. So each of these legislative requests came from Councilwoman Harwig Smith. This is, I would submit, the right way to approach potential amendments to the IPMC. These are her legislation requests. She has text then, and if a majority of the body then agrees, then these amendments will be put in place and be voted on one by one. And so I will defer to her to a certain extent, but I can't explain. I know what I believe all 4 of them do, and then I'll try to give an explanation at your request, and I'll turn it over to her to further elaborate. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So this amendment, the first one that's been proposed, would take, I believe, the provision in the IPMC is that we've adopted it, and strike the provision that says each day there is a violation shall be deemed a separate offense. That matters because if someone is charged criminally for, say it's a bad house, something like that, a nuisance, they can be fined. And you've heard this happening before. If somebody has a really, really bad situation, they'll be fined for each day that their house was in violation. This would make it, no, you can only be fined for 1 day. And I will then, that's how I understand this to read, and I'll turn it over to the councilwoman.
I understood it to read that same way. Last year, when we were bringing things up like this, I mean, I don't know exactly, but our previous fines were like $50, $100, $250 for an offense. Obviously, one house could have multiple offenses when you go through and look at this. You could have, and I'm assuming each one's a violation, so each one's an offense with a fee. We increased our fees to the first notice of $250, second notice, if it's not complied with, is $350, the third one is $500. If I just feel like if you're going to do each day the violation occurs, it's a separate offense, someone could get up into the thousands, $10,000s, $20,000 very rapidly. We keep saying how we want to help people. I don't see how that helps people. If we are going to keep this in here, then you have to apply it to every single person. And I just feel like it's wrong. If they don't comply, it'll be a first-degree misdemeanor, and then you go to court, and then they got all kinds of fines and attorney fees and everything that they're going to be dealing with already on top of that. So I think that part should be removed as far as a separate offense each day. I don't know how anyone else feels, but that's why I proposed it.
Any other comments or questions? Yes, Mrs. Brian Huth.
Thank you, Mrs. Cunningham. And I can see that being a just change. Edmund, could you walk us through if it's a first notice and it's not within a year, then we go on to the second notice? Is that how these work? And so how does Part 4 come into effect?
Part 4 would only come into effect if it's a criminal charge. So there's two different tracks a violation could go down. It can go down the civil fine track, in which case there's a notice. If they don't comply within 30 days, 200 fine, and then there's that step procedure. For each additional day, there's a continuing violation or a continuing offense, separate offense, that's criminal. So this only applies if it's a criminal charge. It doesn't apply to the civil liability structure that we have on top of that. It can go one of either way, or both, theoretically, but that particular language is only for criminal. And it's in our ordinances all over the place, that type of language. So if we look at, like in the health code, just pick one up randomly, violations and penalties for clean indoor air. Each day on which a violation of any provision of this section occurs is a separate and distinct offense which shall be punishable as such. That's boilerplate language that is relevant in the criminal realm.
And when you use that language in the criminal realm, how does it benefit the person advocating for it?
The prosecutor in that case, it can make the penalties more severe. It can make the type of relief that the court issues more severe. It can make the type of charges that the person is ultimately found guilty with more severe. Instead of one count, there can be, 20 counts, right, for every day.
In theory, could it make the offender mitigate faster?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Gregg?
Thank you, Mrs. Cunningham. What determines which path it takes, criminal or civil, or both?
Speed, it'd be the law department, and the building department. It would be the speed, the type of issue it is. If there's a serious issue that needs addressed now, it's going to be more likely to go the criminal route because you get in front of a judge immediately. We talk about civil fines, we're just talking about that. Civil fines. We're not talking about, something that has to be in front of Judge Elam or Judge Fichter now.
So when you say speed, you mean how quickly it's addressed, or how long it takes to be addressed?
Yeah, the latter.
It's longer, it's going to be criminal. If it's addressed quickly by the offender, it's going to be the civil path?
Or kind of like the inverse of that, if it's something the city needs to make sure is addressed as promptly as possible,
Okay.
then it's going to be more likely to be criminal.
The speed at which we as a city need it to be addressed.
Exactly.
Okay.
Mr. Lewis?
I
Oh, I'm sorry.
wasn't quite done.
I'm so
I just
sorry.
wanted to make one comment. I'm not opposed to this, but my comment is that if offenders don't want to be fined, they need to fix the situation. So I tend to not want to slack or back off on fines because I think they're there for a reason, and the reason is to get the action we want done, get it done. So that's my comment.
Mr. Lewis?
So if I'm understanding this correctly, they get their first notice and that's one fine. 30 days passes, they have not corrected, they get their second notice, it's another fine.
Yes,
Another 30 days notice, they get their third fine.
yes.
And then that's when it becomes daily?
No, no, it could be charged criminally or civilly. It could start criminally if they don't.
And that's
comply-
the daily if it goes criminal?
Yes,
If it stays civil,
then we do not have the power to,
to do daily?
yeah.
It caps out at the third. So this is only on, so can you provide examples or ideas on a broad scale of what would be a criminal versus a non-criminal?
Danger, if it's dangerous.
So like a building falling down?
If it's accessible to kids, a building falling down, because this does apply across to, I know we talk mostly in residential, but could apply to commercial too, Councilman.
Okay. Yeah, this is residential and commercial.
Correct.
And that was kind of somewhere else I was going, like, as we go through this, I think there's some good ideas there, like, hey, I don't want to hurt my neighbor who's hard up and just needs to get a shed torn down or something, or whatever. But the landlord or the commercial property owner downtown that is refusing to address things, I don't mind hitting them as hard. So that's kind of where I'm at, like, I don't want to hurt my neighbor, but I also don't mind squeezing a little bit on the investor or the commercial property owner.
And to add to that, that's the hardest hammer that we have, is that criminal, every day, separate days of violation, yeah.
So it makes me wonder, is there a way that we can preserve both? If that makes sense, where we protect our neighbors, but also assure that we are making sure our investors and our commercials are addressing what needs to be addressed.
Yes, Mr. Markham?
So I deal with this a lot in private practice. The biggest red flag I'm seeing right now is the first-degree misdemeanor. That's kind of a concern from my end. Most of the communities I deal with, it's a minor misdemeanor or a fourth-degree misdemeanor. The biggest concern I have with a first-degree misdemeanor is that's 6 months in jail potentially. And, depending on who we're dealing with, that's a stiff penalty, and they could end up losing their home to begin with after 6 months of being incarcerated if that's what ends up happening. Council sets the rules, but we don't get to see how they're implemented. So, Mr. Lewis, you raised a point about civil penalties. There are also a lot of communities, and correct me if I'm wrong, that they'll impose civil penalties daily for the harshest offenders. And what ends up happening with the civil penalty route is usually in the ordinance 30, 60, 90 days, if those civil penalties if they go unpaid, there's usually either an abatement process that the city or the municipality can implement and follow through and either abate the nuisance themselves and then assess the abatement cost to that person. And instead of assessing it to the person, they assess it to the property tax. If it's a landlord and they can't pay it off, then the municipality or the county at that point will foreclose on the property, and the municipality will recoup its costs that way. Or depending on how the municipality crafts its ordinance, they could craft it in such a way where if the municipality abates the nuisance, then the municipality can then pursue civil action to recoup the costs against that person, which would be the city foreclosing instead of the county foreclosing, which is kind of a train wreck of its own. But there's other mechanisms out there. Again, the biggest red flag I see right now is first-degree misdemeanors, kind of a stiff penalty, when a lot of other folks use fourth-degree misdemeanors at most, unless there's a scale.
I agree, maybe we could adjust it to that, because I don't know the difference between the misdemeanors.
Yeah, and it's always worth looking at surrounding communities' code books as well. Some other counties have very flushed out books, others less developed books. It just depends on what community you pick and choose from and what you like. Am I wrong, Mr. May?
No, I don't, I think that this is modeled after the city of Canton. And we certainly welcome your experience into this process, and there's no pride in authorship whatsoever. You're absolutely right. The first-degree misdemeanor is the hardest penalty that can come from, a municipal court. That, there is someone's looking at jail time with a sentence like that, and the municipality has to think in mind, we have to provide counsel, right? You have a right to counsel if you're looking at jail time, and so there is a cost when somebody is being charged under this scheme if it's going the criminal route. Sometimes, and it's been our experience, that's warranted. That type of investment by the community is warranted. Think about your serial offenders. I don't have to say their names, we all know what they are. But that's not to the exclusion of other, degrees of misdemeanor either. It can certainly be scaled. Whatever you guys want to do.
Mr. Lewis?
With all that in mind, is there an avenue where we can preserve both? Because, I've spoke to some business owners and investors in the area, and quite honestly, $500 isn't getting their attention. They'll pay a $500 fee and they don't care, whatever, $500. It's getting my attention. It's getting everybody on my street's attention. But for an investor, it might not. So how can we make sure that we work with our neighbors to help them in correcting what needs to be done? But, I talked to a business owner and they said they were operating in a different community. They had an advertisement that was out of code with that community, and they got hit with $150 a day. They got a letter that said, you are out of code, $150 a day. You're already 6 days out of code. If you continue to operate this way, we will continue to assess $150 a day. So, they paid their $900 fine and they got out of code. They got out of non-compliance that day. And that's the kind of response we want to see out of some people, but that's not necessarily the kind of enforcement I want to put on my neighbor. Does that make sense?
It does. I don't know how to draft that, but it does, because in some ways, I think you said it well. It's, you don't want it to your neighbor, but you want it to be in place as a tool for the city, and how you draw that line, I'm not exactly sure. But I will look at whatever examples you guys have. And this is part of the process of, and I'll turn it over here to Director Hernkane in a moment. We can make changes now, we can put it in place and see how it works. We've just started today, because it was just effective on Friday, is when it became effective citywide. Or we can try to make changes now, whatever you guys want to do. And so, this is the process to approach those changes. And so I thank, the councilwoman for bringing this forward. But whatever direction you guys want to put me, happy to go.
Does Mr. Hernkane want to add to this?
I do, thank you. Regarding the first-degree misdemeanor, I want to say two things. One, our existing, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but our existing ordinances and the codified ordinances are a lot of minor misdemeanor and M4, which is the lowest of the jailable misdemeanors. Those are what we already have on the books, and that's frankly a system that we feel is not quite working. The second part is the administration does like the M1 because frankly, there are a lot of derelict landlords out there, both residential and commercial. And frankly, if the situation warrants it, I think we should allow the law department to pursue them at the M1 level. We have some landlords that are notorious for being slumlords, who are allowing our residents to live in conditions that none of us would want to live in. And frankly, I think a misdemeanor of the first degree, when warranted at the discretion of the law department, is certainly a useful tool to solve a lot of our problems. So,
Mr. Hernkane, you just mentioned at the discretion. So where Mr. Lewis is saying, let's not hurt our neighbor, but let's go after the derelict landlords, would that be the discretion of the law department?
from my understanding, listening to this conversation, yes, that would be the choice of the law department on which avenue to pursue in any given instance based on the things that he previously mentioned regarding.
So we wouldn't have to actually change any of the wording then?
Not to my knowledge. I think it's the way that it is currently written, it allows the law department on a case-by-case basis to decide which avenue to pursue should we get to the end of the road of a complaint to no avail.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Brian Huth, did you have a question? Okay. Mrs. Hardwick Smith?
Go ahead, John.
Mr. Packley?
Yeah, thank you. Is there a possibility, and Edwin, I think in the past, we were told we couldn't, but you can't have a separate for commercial and residential?
No, I don't know that it's impossible to do that. I'm just telling you, the IPMC doesn't make a distinction like
Okay.
that.
But there's possibility we could? Maybe?
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, some other rules or laws in the state do differentiate between,
Registrations, you see that a lot. I'm familiar with that. Yeah, I can't see a reason. I mean, in the world of metaphysics, could something like that exist? The answer is yes. I don't know offhand if there's a model code like that, and maybe the councilman does, but I can't recall one offhand.
because I think if there's that possibility, if something could be written that way, might help solidify that argument a little bit, if possible. All right, thank you.
Mr. Markham?
And this is more a comment on Mr. Hernkane's and kind of a question on Mr. Hernkane's comment about the first-degree misdemeanor really put some teeth behind landlords. What's stopping the municipality, the city, from empowering its own nuisance and abatement ability to, give these slumlords 30 days, 60 days to abate whatever nuisance that we say is on their property? We give them an administrative hearing if necessary. If they don't abate the nuisance within the time frame provided by the city, then the city goes in and abates that nuisance. It could be expensive. The city could end up, footing the bill a little bit, but it solves the problem in an expeditious way and potentially squeezes a unsightly house, unsightly property out of the city for future abatement.
If I may, that's part of our intention with the IPMC. The assessment procedures that you referenced, those exist generally in the city under our old ordinances, but absolutely under the IPMC. That if there are situations where we have to go in and abate, either demolish or clean up, or even high grass, then we are going to have the ability, by the ordinance that we enacted, to put that on the tax bill and go through the auditor's office. So that will be there.
And just to clarify, the standard to find somebody in violation of the code through that civil and administrative proceeding is a much lower bar than to find them guilty criminally, right?
For sure.
And I was a city prosecutor before a county prosecutor before going into private practice. These are the cases juries tend to hate because it's somebody's property and it's the government coming in, whereas we're neutral in the administrative process, but it's much more city-driven as opposed to the due process rights that somebody has in a criminal proceeding, correct?
Say that again? I know it's a rhetorical question, but I missed
I know.
it.
It's just a very different proceeding, administrative versus criminally.
For sure.
and the bars the hurdles are significantly lower.
Yes.
And it empowers the city's ability to really go after the problem.
I'm not going to say that one is to the exclusion of the other. I mean, we've had a challenge. We have a challenge that's severalfold. One of them is to have a clear set of ordinances to even have this type of enforcement, a concise system to put these types of charges on the tax bill. Our ordinances are duplicative. They are not crafted correctly in a modern way. The civil procedures that you're talking about, that is now in place, effective as of Friday. The criminal component to that, they're two different animals. They really are, like you just said. I mean, it's when you have someone that's serious enough to where you're going to ask Judge Elam, about the possibility of 6 months in the Stark County Jail to take up one of his jail beds. I mean, you better have something serious, right? That tool's in there, and we think that tool can be important because we don't know when we're going to need it. And most of the time when we actually have enforcement, it does go a criminal route. Now, this has changed the criminal, it's made it more severe. But to file a civil lawsuit against somebody for this, I mean, it's $350 every time we do anything. I mean, to file the complaint, we're already underwater in terms of the fees that we're going to get. So having that hammer for properties that are really, really serious, the law department believes that matters. But the actual running the process, the assessments, things like that, I mean, 9 times out of 10 times, it never even sees a courtroom. It's going to be just through the tax process.
Right, in worst case, you have administrative hearing, and most people don't know about a 2506 appeal, and if they do know about a 2506 appeal, they screw it up.
That's right. And I mean, not, unfortunately, we want them to have due process, but you're right, 100%. Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis?
I'm wondering if maybe, because what I'm hearing is, you know, we want strict rules that we can enforce and that can be upheld and cause change. And I know I've said it and no one's really rebutted, and I kind of get the sense that you don't necessarily want the average citizen of Massillon to be overly impacted by these. Is there a way where we leave what's in there as is, but then add the caveat where the amendment would actually be for owner-occupied residential properties, the max penalty is an M4 without the daily new charge?
My only hesitation as to whether that would be an equal protection issue. That's the only thing I can think of. Aside from that, then I think the answer would be yes.
You know what I'm saying? Because then you're protecting your neighbor, who's just a guy living there, but the landlords and the commercial property owners would have that bar.
I'd want to research that, but I think so.
My general thought on that would just be splitting it into two different charges. You have the tenant charge, and then you have a residential charge, and then the max penalty. You wouldn't have it all in the same section. You would just title it two different things, would be my 10,000-foot guess.
We'll have to research that.
I don't know if I like that idea, Mr. Lewis, because yes, we want to be nice to our neighbors, but if it's an ongoing issue, day after month after year, we want that property cleaned up. And by sitting and doing nothing because we want to be nice to our neighbors, that doesn't help all the neighbors around this particular property. So I have a concern about that, because we want to move forward and progress and clean, fix, remedy whatever the situation is, instead of being stalled out because the fine is so low and it's a misdemeanor 4, nothing's done about it. So that would be my only concern, to be cautious about moving in that
I
direction.
mean, overall, I'm okay with as written, but I'm hearing the calls of others and saying, I can see where the concern is, right? Like, I know the law department has discretion, and I don't mind leaving some people with discretion, but sometimes leaving discretion in law can get a little bit weird for us. So if we wanted to firm it up, we got to figure something out.
I believe Mr. Gregg's next.
Yeah, my comment is I agree with Mrs. Creamer. I think my thought would be we leave the teeth in the ordinance, so if we need it, it's there, and then allow our administration and our law department to exercise discretion that we trust them with.
Mr. Markham?
And I just want clarification on one thing. I believe the situation that you're describing here, where it's just an ongoing nuisance property, is something that can be addressed through the administrative process, where we declare it a nuisance, we abate the nuisance, we assess the cost to the property, and then if necessary, we sheriff sale the property, recoup our losses in sheriff sale, and then hopefully the new owner is a much better owner than the first one. Which also isn't very kind, but it takes care of the problem in a guaranteed fashion.
Thank you. So, Mr. Mack, you're going to do a little bit more,
I can do some research on the tiered approach and to see if that would be constitutional.
all right, thank you. Okay, the second piece of legislation. Please prepare legislation to amend ordinance number 103-2025 pertaining to Chapter 1306, International Property Maintenance Code, under Title I, Building Codes of Part 13, Building Code of the Codified Ordinances of Massillon, Ohio. Amended ordinance number 103-2025 under Section 1306, period 03, amendments, deletions, and supplements to the International Property Maintenance Code. J, parentheses, application for appeal shall read as the attached Exhibit A.
Okay, on this one, and before I turn it over to Councilwoman, and I feel bad characterizing for you because you did do a nice job on these. This one, right now, if you want to pursue an administrative appeal of one of the orders, there is a $100 fee to be heard by the Board of Building Appeals. If you prevail, you get your $100 back. This eliminates that fee altogether. The purpose of that fee is to hopefully offset our costs, the administrative costs that we have, but understanding, the equity of it. If you are ultimately prevail, you get your money back. This amendment would mean that it doesn't matter if you win or lose, appeals are free. And it does extend the deadline to file an appeal then from 20 days to 30 days.
Thank you. Mrs. Howard-Smith?
Thank you, Councilman Cunningham. So the reason I didn't like this is because, we've already, like I said, we've increased these fines to $250, $350, $500, and then you're charged with a first-degree misdemeanor, which, as they said, is 6 months in jail. That is how it reads right now. Plus, it has the accumulation. I feel like if someone wants to appeal, they go to the Board of Appeals meeting. Those people are not on payroll or anything. It's just our board. But if they want to appeal, if they have a problem, then how are we going to know there's a problem if people can't appeal? Because if it's going to cost them to appeal and then they already have it, now they already got the fine they have to pay no matter what, whatever stage they're in. Now, if they just want to go to the Board of Appeals and talk to them about it, like, hey, and the board's going to say, yeah, we agree with the code enforcement, or they're going to say no. And the way this is written, they're not allowed to interpret this under the one thing the Board of Controls, which is kind of odd for me, then why do you even have? So I just thought that if someone has a problem and they want to go to the board and appeal it to the board, they shouldn't have to pay. Because if it goes through, they're still going to pay regardless. If the board disagrees and they still disagree, then they're going to court, and they're going to take us to court. And they're going to be paying for a lawyer and fees on top of all our other fees. Regardless if they win or lose, they're going to be paying all the court fees. And I just thought that, with the board meetings are usually only once a month, this gives them time. That's why I put the 30 days in instead of 20, and I just don't feel that that's not helping people, but they can't even question anything.
Anybody else? Mr. Gregg?
Yeah, my comment is, first of all, I'm fine with moving the days from 20 to 30. I personally think we keep the $100 fee that they get back if they prevail. I could see that going forward, why not appeal everything? Everybody's going to appeal. There's no cost and there's no disincentive to. I think that the $100 fee is not that substantial, especially for a landlord or an investor, and that it would at least give them a little bit of pause before they would just automatically appeal the decision that they don't like. So bottom line, I like it as it is. I'm okay with moving from 20 days to 30 days.
Mrs. Brian Huth?
Thank you, Mrs. Cunningham. I would agree with Mr. Gregg that having a value, having a cost associated with an action you're going to take puts more weight on it and may give people pause to think, is this something that I truly need to do? Is this something that's absolutely needed? Or is, I just don't want to deal with your rules, so I'm going to appeal it anyway.
Or do I just fix the problem?
Right, I mean,
Yeah.
there's that too. And I would like to say that this isn't the only place that they're asking questions. We start out with a conversation with the code enforcement people that are at your property. This is the issue. Do you know it's there? They're not coming at people. They're interacting with people. They're connecting with people. They're saying, this is the issue. We've been made aware because of this. Do you know it's there? Do you need help with it? What have you done in the meantime? Not all of these are a confrontational situation. So they've had opportunities to ask questions and to seek appeals in other ways without filing fees. So I think this is more of a down the road issue. But I would be on board with keeping the fee as it is.
Anybody else? Mr. Beckley? Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Mrs. Cunningham. On the appeals, though, well, currently, right now, some people are appealing their tax evaluation. There isn't a fee associated with that. And are there any other codes or ordinances or any other situations in the city where people are charged a fee to appeal or to argue something that they feel that is, in their viewpoint, unjust?
Sure, yeah, zoning variances, there's a fee. There's a fee to appeal to council.
What's that
Call
fee?
what it is. Is it $50, something like that? Then it's for the initial variance application, I think there's a $100 fee for the variance. Yeah, zoning, for the BZA, that's where the fee is, okay?
So for zoning, there's a fee, how much is that? Is that $100?
I think so too,
Okay.
That's to change zoning,
I'm
for a
assuming
variance.
to get a variance.
Yeah,
to change.
to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals for a variance request, yeah.
Right,
Same
that's a different
idea.
situation.
But then in
Similar.
this situation, I don't want to make it about me, but if it were someone, if you feel you're being unjust or you're not being represented appropriately and then you want to appeal, you have to pay a fee to have your thoughts heard.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to appeal, you have to pay $100, right?
Yeah.
If you prevail.
Yeah.
If I may,
But if you get a speeding ticket, you go, but it'd be court cost, you'd end up paying court cost regardless, but you don't have to pay a fee to the courts just because, do you, other than court costs?
and if I may, I agree with both Mrs. Brian Huth and Mr. Gregg. The $100, I think, just puts a little bit more oomph into it, that if you want to appeal then, and you win, you get your money back. Rather than just anybody just, take off and appeal. All right, Mr. Lewis?
When someone appeals, does that enact a stay?
Yes, the first one, I believe, does enact a stay.
So,
Yes, don't quote me on that. I know it does in zoning. I believe it does here as well.
so that's also important. If someone is in violation and they've been ordered to make a correction within X amount of time, and they file an appeal, then that stops that window. So if they've been ordered, hey, you must make a correction within 20 days, I file an appeal, that 20-day clock it stops on that day. And they get the advantage of all that additional time while they go through the appeals process. And the reason I bring that up is because during my day job, we deal with appeals and stays. And, there's times where people don't want to alter their course, so they file an appeal, forcing the hand to stay on the course that they're already on until after the hearing. And ultimately, it's just about buying time. So that's another thing to think about.
And it does for certain at 106.6, Councilman, it does stay.
So I would be concerned about that if someone doesn't really want to make an adjustment, they just file an appeal. Like, I don't have to do it now because I'm going to appeal. The appeal process is going to take 14 days. And then once I'm done with my 14 days, my 20 to 30-day clock starts. So I take my 20-day and I turn it into a month and a half. That would be a concern of mine.
Did you want to add anything, Mr. Mack?
No, and I'm not advocating either way. I'm just here to answer as many questions as I can.
Anybody else? Okay, we'll go on to the third. Please prepare legislation to amend ordinance number 103-2025 pertaining to Chapter 1306, International Property Maintenance Code under Title I, Building Codes of Part 13, Building Code of the Codified Ordinances of Massillon, Ohio. Amended ordinance number 103-2025 under Section 1306.03. Amendments, deletions, and supplements, bless you, to the International Proper Maintenance Code as X parentheses, storage of unlicensed motor vehicles prohibited of Part 5 general offenses under Chapter 521, Health, Safety, and Sanitation, Section 521.13 of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Massillon, Ohio. Said addition is attached as Exhibit A.
This one, we have another provision in our ordinances, Chapter 521, Health, Safety, and Sanitation. This is what could be called our health code. This is more commonly enforced by our health department. I think this just places a section as it exists now in the health code under the IPMC, but I'm not sure exactly, so I'll turn it over to you, Councilman Smith.
I wanted to remove section 302.8, the whole thing that they have. Our existing law, I feel, covers it better, and I don't like that one. Our existing amendment, what it does is no person shall store or permit to be stored on any lot or land for a period of more than 20 days any motor vehicle that does not have displayed thereon license plate from the current year unless the vehicle is stored in a completely enclosed building or garage. The 20 days time period shall mean any 20 days and should not mean 20 consecutive days. This section shall not apply to a person doing business in a properly zoned area for sale, salvage, or repair, or impounding motor vehicles. B, in addition, the owner must produce, upon request, verification of insurance papers required by the state law as to the minimum insurance requirement for each vehicle in violation of the subsection hereof. C, any motor vehicle stored for more than 20 days in violation subsection hereof may be towed or impounded. D, whoever violates any of this section is guilty of a minor misdemeanor. Any person convicted of subsequent violation of either of this section within 1 year shall be guilty of a misdemeanor of the first degree. This is our current law. I think it's a good, tough law. I believe it's our police who enforce this law more than anybody, obviously code enforcement, if someone calls about a bunch of junk vehicles or whatever, but I think we got good meat and it explains things more. I do not believe that if someone has a licensed vehicle on their property and it is their property, that they have that right. But if it's unlicensed and it's sitting there as a junk vehicle, then we have the teeth to go have it removed. But usually I believe it's for a lot of them, when there's things even sitting on the road, sometimes vehicles are there forever and they can't really do anything about it. But if there becomes expired license, then they can have it towed. This one, I just don't like their wording. I don't think it applies to our city, and I like our current. So that's what I want. I wanted 302.8 motor vehicles removed, and to go with our current storage of unlicensed motor vehicles prohibited.
Okay. The only thing I would add to that is that if this is, so you really need to look at 302.8 and what follows from that, because that would be the legal language. If this is the route the council wants to go, is think of more wetting the language on A and B and C that was included in the councilwoman's Exhibit A. The penalty things, having a separate penalty for a separate provision of the IPMC could be administratively problematic, but that would be carried into the discussion that we just had earlier about the penalty structures. But what she's saying could definitely be done. It would be changing 302.8 to really A, B, and C, if that makes sense. Does that make sense, Councilwoman?
So you think we should eliminate D, how we have it currently in our laws? So
Well,
it won't
because-
be a minor misdemeanor, it would be, it'll be whatever the violation is if they don't comply to it.
Yes,
I would be okay with that.
that would be doable.
So we could eliminate D, eliminate all of this, eliminate D, and then keep our current laws under 302.8 A, B, and C.
But,
Is that what you're saying?
yeah, and bring that over to the IPMC,
Right.
yeah.
So that would be the new 302, or
Yeah,
will
that
it
would be
be?
possible.
Okay. That's what yeah, to totally remove that, go with ours. And I'm okay if we remove D since it conflicts, because that was the,
Yeah. It'd have to be 20 days from the notice, right? Yeah. And I'm kind of doing this on the fly, so I know this is the first hearing on this, so this is my first pass. The Director Hernkane just mentioned, how do we calculate the days? So we never do math in public, so I want to have a little bit of time to digest this. But I think on first pass, what you're suggesting is possible.
Mrs. Brown-Huth?
Thank you, Mrs. Cunningham. Mrs. Hardwick-Smith, from the IMPC, did I say those letters right? Sometimes I don't. For the 302.8, and that's the one that you don't like, correct?
correct.
And so is it that is it the wording because inoperative or unlicensed? Is that, I'm trying to see what the discrepancy between the two are, to make sure that,
That is one, that is a big discrepancy. They say inoperative or unlicensed. Where I am saying that it should, I like our current law where it just says unlicensed. This goes into, I mean, I don't think our code enforcements have a right to be, you know, go start your car, does this need this, you know, in a state of disrepair or process, and they're gonna, now they're car mechanics, and they, you know, I just don't like that. We don't have a problem with people painting all over in paint booths. I don't know what the sense of any of that is, or major, you know, usually if people are doing that, they're doing something in their own enclosed building, and that's their business.
well, we would hope
but
they
the-
would, but if they don't, it would be nice to have something that would let them know that they can't spray paint in their driveway that's like super adjacent to their neighbor.
I don't think we have an issue with people like spray painting all over, but,
To add to that, the law department's preference would be, as much as we can, defer to the language of the IPMC, because that's from the code council. This language has been litigated, and tweaking that language would certainly be our preference than to wholesale bring from another one of our ordinances over. But, you know, either, I think, are possible and doable from our vantage point. We wouldn't want to delete as it stands now from the health code, but mirroring that, I think would be possible.
Mr. Markham?
So I think I'm tracking what you're saying. I think I'm tracking what you're saying. The concerns here are the words inoperative and the sentence dealing with painting of vehicles.
that's actually, that's an exception that they're allowed to, the exception part, that they're allowed to do body work in their own building. I mean, which
Okay.
I don't even.
Because we could probably just redline and strike inoperative, leave unlicensed motor vehicle, and accomplish the goal of subsection A in the proposed amendment.
And then are we gonna get rid of the "and vehicles shall not at any time be in a major disassembly, disrepair, or being stripped or dismantled"?
We could do that and accomplish the same thing.
I mean, we'd have to, remove that too.
Yeah, I mean,
So then if we remove that and we don't add our existing thing, then it would come down to one sentence. Except as provided in other regulations, unlicensed motor vehicles shall not be parked, kept, or stored on any premises, and vehicles shall not at any time be, and then strike the rest. It would end it with that.
and it also gets rid of the concerns about subsection D, and then the insurance concern you raised a minute ago, subsection B. And then, Mr. Mack, again, it's best to stick with the tried and true International Property Maintenance Code. And we've just taken 3 lines and made it 1 line, and it's clear as day.
Except for then they don't have, how do you know if it's unlicensed or not? They can look it up. You don't have, how do you know they have proof of insurance?
That's where it comes down to enforcement versus non-enforcement, and it's
Right,
one of those.
they don't have to have insurance. Basically, as long as they have a license, that's all they need. If they have a current license, if we change that, then it just comes down to if it's an unlicensed, that has to be licensed. As long as it's licensed, then that's all they're,
Yeah,
I'd be okay with that. Removing everything and just keeping 1 line, except as provided under regulations, unlicensed motor vehicles shall not be parked, kept, or stored on any premises. Except for, obviously in a building, they can do whatever they want.
Mrs. Kramer?
So let me picture this. So we're saying that it's okay to have a car on all 4 blocks, no wheels, no hood, but it has a license tag, and sit there for whatever length of time we think it's okay. And we have to look at that day in, day out. We think that's okay. Is that what we're saying? Is that the picture we're trying to paint in our neighborhoods? I just want to understand that, because in my ward, we've had calls. Cars are up on jacks, up on blocks, sitting on the street for multiple days, and code enforcement has to get out there and get the residents to move that vehicle, get it fixed, get it repaired, get it off the street. So I'm just questioning what we're willing to accept for our neighborhoods, because we want safe neighborhoods. So if a car is up on jacks, there's kids around, how safe is a child climbing around a car that there's no supervision, doesn't have a hood, so it's just climbing on this car? So I think we have to be very careful in what we think is okay and acceptable, because there's a health and safety issue here that I'm not agreeing with. But that's just my thoughts.
Mr. Gregg?
Thank you, Mrs. Cunningham. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Mack, but this section seems to me like that scenario that Mrs. Creamer just put forth would not be okay under this unless the vehicle was within a structure, as it says, a structure enclosed or similarly enclosed area designed and approved for such purposes. Would a garage, a residential garage fit that description? So if I have a hobby of, rebuilding old cars, I can't do it in my driveway with a car in total disrepair, but I can do it in my garage. Is that correct? Would that be allowed by this section?
As it stands now, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Is it, the circumstances that Councilwoman Kramer described would be illegal now under the IPMC. If you pass the amendment, what Councilwoman Kramer described would be legal.
All right, as I think it should be. But I do also believe that someone that has the hobby of working on cars should be able to do that, but within a structure, within a structure, perhaps, I don't know, a enclosed backyard, if it's not within a structure, but it's an enclosed backyard, would that be allowed? Or that's gonna be up to interpretation by
Inside a
the,
structure. Or similarly enclosed, yes. Yes, structure is a defined word, but similarly enclosed, yes. You're
okay,
correct.
so an enclosed backyard would be okay, or back patio, wherever it is, but not out on the street, not in the driveway. That's the way I think it should be.
Mr. Markham?
Thank you.
I would just suggest potentially adding that language into the exception, such as a residential garage or fenced-in backyard. Something like that might make the exception more clear, because this administration's interpretation fits that. 20 years from now, will the administration's interpretation still agree, or will the interpretation change? So the more clear we can be, the better, probably.
Mrs. Hardwick-Smith, did you want to comment?
Our current law does say that, you can do, it says unless the vehicle is stored in a completely enclosed building or garage. So basically, our current law says that, whatever's in your garage, you can do whatever, but you can't, if it's outside, it has to have license plates that are current for the year.
But that would eliminate the possibility of doing it in an enclosed backyard, because this says completely enclosed building or garage.
Mr. Lewis?
Julie, I think
I think you're looking at, that's only if they don't have license plate, like if
I think the argument they're trying to make, though, is that our current law, if you put a license plate on it, if it doesn't have tires, it doesn't have an engine, as long as you have a license plate on it, you're fine.
I don't think you can have a vehicle on jacks in our roads anyhow, like
Well, I mean, in your driveway, the way the current law is written, it's not disallowing it.
the way either law is written.
Well, because without tires or a motor, it'd be inoperable. So you'd hit them on the inoperable side, is what I think they're arguing, if I'm correct. I mean, tell me if I'm wrong.
Simply a repair.
Anybody else? All right, so you're going to rewrite that wording, Mr. Mack?
I think, I heard some feedback on adding some verbiage to the exception, and I'm happy to do that.
Okay. All right, and then my last piece. Please prepare legislation to amend ordinance number 103-2025 pertaining to Chapter 1306 International Property Maintenance Code under Title I Building Codes of Part 13 Building Code, Section 308.5 Bulk Pickup, added to ordinance number 103-2025 under Section 1306.03. Amendments, deletions, and supplements to the International Property Maintenance Code, hereby be in Section Y parentheses of ordinance number 103-2025, shall read, bulk pickup such as mattresses, couches, furniture, and other non-organic rubbish that does not fit in rubbish containers shall be placed at curb no more than 72 hours of scheduled pickup.
And I think this change just reads what it says.
This one is simply an addition, as I talked before. In here, it says everything has to be an approved rubbish container. Obviously, many of us have bulk pickup with our trash in Massillon, whether you're throwing out, a fan or a piece of furniture. They have rules about if it has to be wrapped already, if they pick it up, but I just didn't want people not being able to put their trash out when they have arranged pickup for it, for unlimited, for bulk trash that they provide, that they could still put it out. But on the other hand, I don't want big pieces sitting out there for a week, so I put a time limit on it of 72 hours. So this just makes it so people are not automatically breaking our rules because it's not in a container, because not everything fits in a container, no matter how big they are. But we don't want trash piled up all week long while you're waiting it or this. I mean, it has to be scheduled pickup. You have scheduled pickup arranged and within 70, that's why I put the time limit on it, to kind of put the hammer on it, but yet still allow it.
Nothing else to add, yeah?
Okay, thank you. I think I'm finished. Oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. Kramer.
There's going to be one more addition, because I did talk to Mr. Mack today. I did send him an email last week regarding additional verbiage regarding vehicles cannot be used as storage containers, because we do have that, and I stated operable or inoperable, because we see that throughout the neighborhood. So I know he's going to be working with that, correct?
Yeah,
that
and
language?
so us three will then connect on how to get it to where Councilwoman Hardwick Smith got it, to present it just like we are now. Yeah, so us three can work on that.
So then we'll see that at our next work session. All right, thank you, Mr. Mack.
All right.
And Mr. Hernkane.
We're talking about changing the verbiage about the vehicles. Are we going to be amending the International Property Maintenance Code 302.8? Or are we going to be amending ordinance 103.25?
So we talked then about what would be, I believe, an amendment to the legislation request.
Okay.
That would in effect amend 302.8.
Okay. Okay, we can get together on that too.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So, just a point of procedure.
Yeah,
I want to make sure we're clear. Councilwoman Smith brought forth these amendment requests. If the committee signs them, then they stand, and we'd have to amend, or you'd have to make corrections before the committee signs. Does that make sense?
it does. So then it's your guys' preference.
Technically, what's
Can't say it.
technically what's in front of us is what Ms. Smith has offered us. If we are wanting to make adjustments, that's fine, but Ms. Smith does not have to just acquiesce to the adjustments that we've recommended. So if you guys sign as a committee tonight, it's fine, but it's presented as is, and then we would have to amend through the readings process, or it doesn't get signed tonight and adjustments are made, and then it is signed after said adjustments are made. I just want to make sure we preserve Ms. Smith's work and we don't just start adulterating it without her consent. Does that make sense?
So then I will just wait until I hear them? Or, I mean, I'm happy, it's the same language for me either way. just whatever format you guys put it in.
So that decision is up to Mrs. Smith, right? As to whether or not to
It's
go.
up to that committee whether or not they want to sign the legislation request that Ms. Smith has put forward.
Right.
And you guys, that committee can sign, even if they do want to amend, they can sign, and then just future amendments will alter it once again, which would probably be, that's one road. The other road would be not sign and
Start over.
start over. If we are interested in actually addressing these issues, because I believe Ms. Hardwick-Smith has brought up important issues, my personal preference or recommendation would be just sign it and then amend it later. It's a little bit more tricky, but that way we don't lose it, because we might lose it if we don't.
Just one small question, so, and just mostly for my information, if Mrs. Hardwick-Smith, since she's the one bringing the legislation forward, she could decide not to even put it forward to be signed by her committee, correct? So
If
it's
she wants to
ultimate-
withdraw it, she can withdraw it.
Oh, that's right, I'm sorry, you're right, Mrs. Creamer, Sarita's the chair. So, so it would be, so does that matter? I mean, again, she's the one bringing forward the legislation.
My thought would be Mrs. Hardwick-Smith can withdraw her request. If she doesn't withdraw her request, then Ms. Cunningham puts it in front of the committee whether or not they want to sign.
That's right. So my point was just, it's ultimately, since she's done the work and she's got the skin in the game, it's her decision. If whether, how we move forward.
Even if we sign it and move forward, we haven't passed it yet, so we can amend it beforehand. So that by signing all of them, we're just moving it forward. It's not emergency language. We have 2 more work sessions and 2 more council meetings, we can talk about it. I can get together with Jill and Edmund, and we could see if there's a way we can incorporate everything, you know, by maybe keeping this, but adding something about a vehicle cannot be on, you know, it has to be on 4 tires, it can't be, you know, it has to be roller licensed, you know, hood on and closed that people can't get to it, you know, for safety. And maybe we could make an adjustment and to what we already have and switch it around, rather than starting from scratch. So I'm signing all of them.
And that would be my recommendation. Let's keep it in front of us. And really, with Mr. Ray absent tonight, it's only needing Cunningham's.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I agree with that. We don't want to lose it after all of this hard work, Julie.
Thank you.
And thank you. All righty. I'm now finished.
Thank you, Mrs. Cunningham. Next, we have Parks and Recreation, Mrs. Hardwick-Smith.
Thank you, Councilman Gregg. I have one item for Parks and Rec. It's to please prepare an ordinance to amend Section 2D Occupation List of Class Titles of Ordinance Number 139, 2017. That's quite a time ago. To increase the class pay schedule for the golf course banquet chef or facility manager within the 920 Golf Course Department from 16S to 18S. Essentially, they have gone through all the positions in Park and Rec and made wage adjustments and standard raises, and this one has kind of been like left out. It's the only loose one they have. They discussed it with the board. That's the pay scale they decided to moving it to. And it was the Massillon Recreation Board, by a vote of 4-0, approved this. I'd like to call Mr. Pedro up, and he can kind of explain this a little more. He's the Director of Parks. Thanks, Steve.
Good evening, thank you. I do want to make one note here. On this, it says 139-217. What we did on that one, we changed the name of that title. So I don't want you to think we're doing this again from 2017. As far as I know, these class titles were made in 1997. In 2017, we just changed the name to Golf Course Banquet Chef and Facility Manager. So what we asked the rec board to do last week is to increase this, this one title from a 16S to an 18S. And again, it's just to line everybody up. This takes care of everything that we've done in the last couple of years to update some salaries with our people.
Did anyone have any questions for me or Mr. Pedro? Councilman Brian Huth?
Thank you. Is it a one-person position? Are there multiple people? in
No,
this
this is
position?
one person, yes, yes. This is the person that runs the food and beverage department at the Legends.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pedro.
Thank you.
Mrs. Hardwick Smith, anything else? Anything else?
I'm sorry. No, nothing else for Park and Recs. I was waiting.
All right, thank you. Police and Fire, Mr. Markham?
I do not believe there's anything. Mr. Lewis, Mr. Pacula, correct me if I'm wrong. Nothing further.
All right, thank you. Public Utilities and Environmental, Mrs. Brian Huth?
Thank you. Nothing this evening.
All right, thank you. Rules and Courts and Civil Service, that's my committee, and we have nothing this evening. Streets, Highways, Traffic, and Safety, Mr. Packley.
Thank you, Mr. Gregg. There is one for this evening, and it's legislation for paving their roadways. So please prepare an ordinance to authorize the Director of Public Service and Safety to advertise for and receive sealed bids and to enter into contract with the lowest and best bidder upon the approval of the Board of Control for the 2025 street resurfacing project contract. Mr. Pitts, could you please there? I know you're waiting in the way.
Good evening, Council. Yeah, just as Councilman Packley had just said, I have some packets for you. Let me pass these around first. So these packets, there were a few typos in the original legislation with the attachment. One of them was Darby. It was already paved. So in the original, I believe that you guys have in front of you, Darby is on there. That was already paved. So I removed that from the 2025 listing. The second adjustment that you'll see in your packet is if you flip your page over into the 2025 ARPA street resurfacing. All of those had stated, like the first, let me see, 6 streets had stated Ward 1. It's actually Ward 2. So minor typo there. Just wanted to be clear so everybody can see it.
Where was that one? Sorry.
So if you flip over on the back side, it says 2025 ARPA street resurfacing.
Okay,
At the top, there are 6 streets that say Ward 1. They're actually Ward 2.
okay, thank
So I
you.
just wanted to, so everybody's clear there. So Darby and Ward 2 for the first 6 streets. And then the last amendment is I attached the 2024 street resurfacing program as well, just so you guys can have an idea of where we're kind of at with the streets that we've resurfaced thus far since last year, and where we're at today. So, I guess I'll just open it up to any questions.
Anyone have any questions for Mr. Pitts?
I do.
Oh, okay. Holly Bryan?
Thank you. Alex, have all of 2024s been completed, or were there some that are carrying over to the spring?
Yeah, so there, excuse me, so yeah, there are a few streets that are still, that still need to be completed. At the very top, you'll see 2024 street resurfacing program to be completed in 2025. Essentially, the contractor hadn't finished before the end of last year. So a few streets in Ward 5 and then a decent chunk in Ward 6 still need to be completed yet, so.
Any other questions? Mrs. Creamer?
So, excuse me, on the second page where it says 2025 ARPA street
Yes,
resurfacing, I don't recall having street paving as part of the ARPA funds.
correct.
So I'm still searching for that document that lists that. So was this additional funding that was not used, designated under one of the sections of the ARPA funding? Because I think there's like, what, 12, 15 different designated items that
Yeah.
we were going to use these funds for?
Yeah, so that, it says 2025 ARPA street resurfacing. That's a little misleading. It's actually, all of these streets are actually a part of our storm sewer projects. So 20th Street, 26th Street, Tremont. So those storm sewer projects that we used ARPA funds for, these streets are getting resurfaced as a causality of doing that project. Does that make sense? So, yeah, it's,
So we had extra funds to pay the streets?
no, in order to do that project is what I'm getting at. So when we put in the storm sewer system, you're tearing up the roadway, and a lot of it'll get damaged, so we have to come back and resurface it. That's how it happens with any utility project that we do. So as a result, these streets are getting resurfaced as well, technically more like reconstructed, so even better than resurfacing, so.
Okay.
So then page 2 is all what streets were the stormwater.
Based off of our storm sewer projects that we had through ARPA, correct?
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Creamer, does that answer your question? Perfect, thank you. Go ahead. Or Joy?
Thank you, Councilman Beckley. I have, looking at my list in Ward 5, where we have like Karn Avenue, 13th to 15th, Lawn, 13th to 15th, Niles to Walnut, Niles to Overlook. These are all little teeny sections. I mean, none of them are big areas being paved in my ward. What I would ask, is it possible, in looking at this, because around Lawndale Park, 13th and 14th from Overlook to Lawn, especially 14th, there are potholes all over. It is an absolute mess. Like, and those are little teeny sections just going from Overlook up to, I want to say Lawn, you know what I mean, the dead end there. We're doing everything around it. We already did 15th. I just wondered if we could add in those two little sections at least, because I'm kind of discouraged, like the areas of Section 5, it's not really a lot of miles. There's small areas. But at least if we're doing those little areas, it would complete the whole area by doing those small, not all of 13th and 14th, but at least the area right there. Especially 14th is really bad if you have a chance to drive up and look around it. I mean, they've been complaining to me for years, and then last time we talked about it, they were like, okay. So, if you could, I mean, it would kind of, they could actually, I mean, when they're working on those other ones, it's the only thing you're leaving undone. Okay.
Yeah, so.
If you could look into that, I appreciate it.
Yeah, we'll look into it. As far as, to address the first concern about how many feet / miles Ward 5 has been dedicated, you're at a mile with Ward 5. So the entire program itself is 5 miles. So you're a fifth of the program right now.
That's all we're feeding this year is 5 miles, all this?
In 2025 street resurfacing program, yes, 5 miles. So Ward 5 has a mile. And as far as looking at Overlook 13th and 14th, I did see that. They are prime candidates to be resurfaced. The only reason why we picked those streets in Ward 5 is, one, trying to spread the wealth evenly. Two, and trying to strategically basically resurface the roads that we've already kind of resurfaced near in the past. Like in 2024, we resurfaced in that area, so we're just kind of trying to finish up that area before we move on to Overlook and 13th and 14th, because Overlook itself is a long stretch in
Right.
general, so,
Right, and I figured Overlook's gonna be a big one, probably next year.
yeah.
But if we did those small sections from Overlook up on 13th and 14th, you're talking only those two small sections, then that would complete that whole little square, at least of the neighborhood.
Right, so the only thing that I would say to that, and I'm not saying that we can't do that, it's just, it's nice to, I say that it's nice, but it's nice to have pavement that is a little deteriorated to haul heavy equipment. So like if you're going to pave Overlook, you're gonna need a big mill, large paver. Bringing all of that heavy traffic onto a freshly paved road is not ideal. So if we have like 13th, 14th to kind of use as like our haul route onto Overlook, that'll be nice, so. And then we would 13th and 14th right next to each other. Since they're all grouped together.
Something
Microphone, Julie.
Okay,
Yeah.
Sorry.
Mr. Lewis?
Did I see that this is about 1.2 million?
Correct.
Don't we collect about 2.2 million on the tax?
I don't know the exact number, but as far as street resurfacing goes, what originally went into the budget in 2024 was 1 million. The only reason why it was a larger program is we came back and reappropriated from the carryover 1.4.
Okay.
1.4, yeah. Let me make sure. Yeah.
I have a couple questions. So on these repaving projects, hopefully that you look to the future, that there aren't any roads that are gonna be repaved this coming year, that the storm sewer, or the sanitary sewer, or they're not gonna put in a new water line in the next 2, 3, 4 years?
Yeah, so we try to plan around that for our sake, for our utilities, like
Yeah.
storm and sanitary. I mean, that's what we try to do. Water, they need to plan around us, right? Aqua Ohio, it's our infrastructure, they plan around us, we don't plan around them, right? So we meet with them, tell them, basically give them like an idea of where we're looking to pave, and then they kind of come up with their capital improvement plan based off of what we're doing.
So hopefully they don't show up in the next few years on a newly paved road.
That's the idea. Now, if it's a water main break, I mean, there's nothing you can do about that.
So that- Okay.
So,
And then, point of procedure, since there wasn't a change, a typo, do we need to redo this? No? Okay,
it wasn't in the
all right. Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Pitts.
Yeah, thank you.
And then, one point of discussion on my end, the next 2 weeks, I will not be present at the meetings. So, thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Councilman Packley. Finally, Finance with Councilman Lewis.
Yes, please prepare an ordinance to appropriate the unappropriated balance of the 1201 street construction M&R to the following account: to street resurfacing, $100,000. And we have the illustrious Mr. Pitts here to share with us.
Thank you for that introduction, Councilman Lewis. Loved it. So yeah, we are trying to appropriate from the carryover $100,000. Originally in the budget, we had 1.123 million. This will align us to 1.223. So,
Just covering the gap for the project you just told us about.
correct. So,
Any questions? All right, the next piece we have is pretty standard. Our local law department provides prosecutorial services to many of the small villages around us. This one is for Hills and Dales Village, and will be effective January 1st of 2025, all the way to December 31st, 2025, and they will pay us $2,000 for doing so. Any questions? Emergency language is on it, obviously, because it's already mid-February. That is all I have, President Pro Tem.
Thank you, Councilman Lewis. If that's all we have this evening, I would say we are adjourned.